On my birthday, my stepmother and stepsister threw a party for themselves as I cleaned up their mess. My stepsister laughed and said, "You'll never be more than our servant." Years later, when she showed up begging for a job, she never expected to see me sitting behind the desk, because I remember that day as if it happened yesterday. My birthday, supposedly a day to celebrate me, ended up being nothing more than an afterthought, a mere backdrop to the grandiose event that my stepmother and stepsister had, or castrated for themselves. The house was alive with chatter, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. But none of it was for me. I stood on the sidelines watching as they reveled in their own self-made world, while I was relegated to the role of the invisible servant. It wasn't just a party, it was a statement, a loud and cruel reminder of my place in their world. The decorations were extravagant, the kind of thing you'd see in a high-end magazine spread. But they felt hollow in my eyes. Every corner of the house was adorned with expensive flowers, luxurious balloons, and glimmering lights. My stepmother, flawless in her designer dress, floated from guest to guest, a beacon of charm and warmth in contrast. I stood in the corner of the living room, gripping a plastic trash bag, picking up the remnants of the night. My presence was acknowledged by none, save for the occasional glance or whispered comment. But those were mere glances of dismissal, not recognition. I had learned long ago that my life wasn't meant to be celebrated, at least not by them. My stepmother and stepsister had made that clear from the start. I was a burden, a ghost in their world of glitz and glamour. They hadn't asked for me, and I was constantly reminded of my unwanted position in the family. They got everything: affection, attention, respect, while I received nothing more than a task list. I wasn't a daughter, I was a chore. Their priorities were clear. Their happiness came first, and I was nothing more than the tool they used to maintain it as I swept up the remnants of food and drink from the floor. I heard the sounds of celebration echoing from the next room. I could almost imagine my stepsister smiling in her new dress, twirling around laughing with friends, her life sparkling before her. I couldn't help but feel a deep resentment build inside me. This wasn't just another birthday. This was a reminder that I didn't belong, that I would never be a part of their world, no matter how much I tried. I wiped a tear from my cheek, the frustration of it all threatening to consume me. The unfairness was overwhelming, but there was nothing I could do about it, or so I thought. It wasn't until later that evening, when my stepsister made that comment, that I realized something had shifted within me, something I couldn't ignore. It was subtle at first, like a whisper in the back of my mind, but it was growing louder with every passing moment. As I returned to the kitchen, I found my stepsister standing there, a glass of champagne in her hand, her laughter, light and carefree, filled the space. She caught sight of me still cleaning, and I saw the familiar smirk play on her lips. It wasn't the first time she'd looked at me with disdain, but tonight her gaze was colder, more cutting, you know? She began, her voice ripping with mock sweetness. "You'll never be more than our servant, that's all you'll ever be." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach, though. I tried to keep my composure. My stepsister had always been cruel, but this was different. She said it with such certainty, as if she truly believed it. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Her words echoed in my mind, louder than the music from the party, sharper than the clinking of glass. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The anger, the hurt, the humiliation, it all converged into one singular thought. I will make her regret that. But at that moment, I had to hold back. I couldn't let her see the storm brewing inside me. I couldn't let her know how deeply her words had affected me. Instead, I smiled and nodded as I always had, pretending that I was okay, but I wasn't. I was seething, a fire starting to burn inside me, a fire that would take years to fuel and ignite as the party continued without me. I stood in the shadows cleaning up after them, but in that moment, I wasn't just a servant. I wasn't just a background character in their perfect little world. I was something more. The desire for revenge, for justice, for a chance to flip the script was born that night. And though I wasn't ready to act on it yet, I swore to myself that I would rise. I would rise far beyond the life they had expected for me. And when I did, I would make them regret underestimating me for the next few years. I focused all my energy on my education and career. I threw myself into my studies, determined to carve out a life for myself that had nothing to do with them. I didn't just want to escape, I wanted to thrive. I worked 2 jobs, studied late into the night, and slowly, one step at a time, I built the life I had always dreamed of. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building something that would be mine and mine alone. In those years, I learned many things. I learned how to make connections, how to speak with authority, how to navigate the world with the confidence that had always eluded me. I learned that success wasn't just about what you had, it was about who you became, and I became someone powerful, someone respected. But despite all my achievements, there was one thing that still noted at me, my step-family. Every success I had, every victory was tinged with the knowledge that they still saw me as inferior, that they still didn't believe I belonged. I could feel the weight of their disdain with every step I took, every accolade I earned, but what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that I wasn't the same person anymore. I had become someone who would no longer be overlooked. I had become someone who would make them see me whether they liked it or not. And so on that fateful day when the call came from my stepsister, I knew it was time she needed a job. She was struggling desperate, her life spiraling downward in a way that mirrored my own wants, lost and helpless. The irony wasn't lost on me years ago. She had mocked me, belittled me, and now here she was asking for my help. I hesitated for only a moment. There was a part of me that wanted to ignore her, to let her suffer as I had suffered. But then I remembered what I had promised myself. All those years ago, I would rise, and now I had the power to decide what happened next. I would be the one to hold the keys to her future. As I sat at my desk, waiting for her arrival, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. There was no joy in this moment, no triumph. It was just a simple truth. I had finally come full circle as I sat at my desk. The heavy silence in the room pressed against me. I had anticipated this moment, but now that it was here, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. My stepsister, once the source of all my humiliation, was on her way to see me. The very thought made my pulse race with a mix of nervousness and something deeper, something I hadn't fully acknowledged until now. It wasn't fear. It was the power I now held over her. And the weight of that realization had both its perks and its responsibilities. The door creaked open and in walked my stepsister. Looking entirely out of place, she stood in the doorway, dressed in a plain outfit. Her once confident posture now slumped, her eyes scanning the room nervously. I noticed the slight tremor in her hand as she clutched her purse for a moment. I wondered if she could sense the irony in the situation. But then I pushed that thought aside. It didn't matter now. What mattered was that I had the upper hand, and I intended to keep it that way. Well, it's been a long time, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. I gestured for her to sit. She hesitated, looking at the chair in front of my desk, as though it were a trap, but she eventually sat down. I could see the wear on her face, stress, desperation. Something I had never imagined I'd see in her. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," she said, her voice tight. "I really need this job. My situation isn't great right now." I couldn't help but marvel at the irony. She, the one who had once looked down on me, now sat before me, humbling herself in ways I never thought possible. She was pleading, but not just for any job. She was pleading for my help. And yet there was something about the way she said it that felt insincere. Perhaps it was the way she tried to hide the edge of entitlement that still lingered in her voice, or the faint trace of the old arrogance that I could still see in her eyes. "I'm sure you've been doing well with your connections and all," she continued, attempting to steer the conversation in a direction that flattered both of us. "I can do anything, any position you need. Filled, I promise you know how hard I work. I can be helpful." Her words were carefully crafted, but I could hear the desperation behind them. She wasn't just asking for a job. She was trying to manipulate the situation, trying to remind me of the way she had always been in control. The thought made something inside me burn hotter, but I maintained my composure. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about power. "I don't doubt your abilities," I replied, my voice smooth, but things aren't as simple as they once were. You've got to prove yourself, especially now." She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly sensing that the power dynamic had shifted. The confident stepsister who once dominated every room now looked like a small child, caught in her own web of self-made illusions. The fact that I could see this the way she was unraveling before me made me feel a strange sense of satisfaction. I wasn't just winning this battle, I was watching her crumble in real time, but there was a part of me that still held back, unsure whether to push her further or let her plead more. "I'm sorry for what I said," before she blurted out, suddenly catching me off guard. I was wrong. I didn't mean it. You're not just a servant. You've always been more than that. Please just give me a chance." The words hung in the air for a moment, and I found myself pouting. She apologizing, the girl who had once laughed as I scrubbed the floors beneath her, who had watched me clean up her mess while she partied. Her apology was like a poison in disguise. Too little, too late. I had waited for this moment for years, but in the moment it finally arrived, I realized something unexpected. I didn't want her apology. I didn't need her to apologize. I needed her to understand that her arrogance had cost her everything, and the only thing that could make her realize that was seeing her in my position, you know? I said slowly, my voice now carrying a different weight. Words are cheap, especially when they're set out of desperation. You can apologize all you want, but actions are what matter. I can't just take your word for it anymore. You'll have to prove yourself, but don't think for a second that I'll forget how you treated me all those years. Her face paled. I saw it, the fear creeping into her eyes. She wasn't used to being spoken to this way. She had been the one calling the shots for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be the one on the receiving end of criticism. But I was no longer. The girl had once dismissed. I was someone who had built her own life step by step, while she had squandered her opportunities, and now I was in control. I understand, she stammered. I'll do whatever it takes. I can work hard. I can prove it. I tilted my head, watching her closely. The desperation was evident now, no longer masked by bravado, and yet despite the shift in her demeanor, I couldn't ignore the lingering feeling that something was still off her words. Though full of regret, didn't quite match the sincerity I had hoped to hear. Perhaps this wasn't the reckoning I thought it would be. Perhaps this was just another one of her calculated attempts to regain what she had lost. I leaned back in my chair, staring at her, and for a moment I let the silence stretch out. It was a power play, and she knew it. Fine, I said. Finally, my voice colder than before. I'll give you a chance, but understand this. You're on probation, one mistake, and you're gone. She nodded, her relief palpable. But there was no real victory for me in her words. Yes, I had made her beg. Yes, I had forced her into a position of weakness. But I also realized that her struggle was not the ultimate triumph. The real triumph was in how far I had come from the girl she had mocked, to the woman who now had the power to shape her fate. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming everything I had lost, and ensuring that I never lost my strength again as she left the office. A part of expected to feel a rush of satisfaction, a sense of victory that would wash over me, but instead I felt something else, an overwhelming sense of clarity. The true power I realized lay not in making her suffer, but in moving forward, in making her realize that her time had passed. And mine was just beginning, and that was enough for me. The days that followed my encounter with my stepsister felt surreal, as though time itself had slowed down, just to let me breathe in the moment of my newfound power. But the innate initial satisfaction of holding the upper hand over her began to fade as quickly as it had arrived. There was no instant gratification in seeing her beg for a job. The true nature of my struggle, of all the years I had spent overlooked and dismissed, settled in like a weight I couldn't shake. It wasn't just that I had risen above them, it was that I had spent so many years being invisible, being the quiet bystander in a world that never saw me, that I wasn't sure how to step into my new role. Fully in the weeks that followed, I found myself stuck between two versions of myself. The person I had been and the person I was becoming. There was a noticeable shift within me as I began to lean into the strength I had gained over the years, but even with my professional success, I could not shake the past, nor could I escape the gwing feeling that my progress was somehow incomplete. There was still so much of me that had been shaped by those years of struggle. It wasn't just that I wanted to rise above the life they had mapped out for me, it was that I wanted to prove I could become someone entirely different. someone they would have no choice but to reckon with. So I pushed forward. I worked harder than ever before, taking on additional responsibilities, seizing every opportunity that came my way. I spent countless nights studying networking and honing my skills, determined to make a name for myself in a world that had once excluded me, and slowly but surely I began to rise. The feeling of accomplishment was intoxicating. But even as I achieved success, there was a sense of loneliness that clung to me. The friends I made along the way, while kind and supportive, couldn't fill the void that had been carved by years of rejection and mistreatment. The hardest part wasn't the late nights or the sacrifices. It was the emotional scars that seemed to linger, no matter how far I pushed them down, no matter how many accolades I received, no matter how many doors I opened. I could still hear the echoes of my stepsister's words from that night. "You'll never be more than our servant." It was a haunting phrase that I had buried deep within me, but it had never fully left. Every promotion, every milestone I reached felt hollow. When I remembered that I was still in their eyes, just the girl who cleaned up their mess. But I refused to let those voices define me. I worked harder, climbed higher, and ultimately landed a job that not only offered financial security, but gave me a sense of autonomy. I had never known I was no longer a servant. I was a professional, and yet as my career blossomed, I realized something profound. The more I succeeded, the more I felt disconnected from the life I had left behind. The scars I had carried for so long were still there, but they had become a part of me, a part of my drive. My resilience, my identity wasn't just about proving them wrong anymore. It was about proving to myself that I was worthy of the life I had built. One morning, as I sat in my office, I glanced out the window and thought about the girl I had once been, the girl who had scrubbed floors, cooked meals, and done everything to make them happy, yet was never acknowledged in return. I thought about the years I had spent dreaming of a different life, wondering if I would ever escape the prison of their expectations. But as I reflected on my journey, I couldn't help but smile. I had made it. I had succeeded beyond anything I had ever imagined. I was no longer a bystander in my own life. I had become the architect of my own destiny. But then, just as the sense of accomplishment was beginning to settle in, the phone rang. My stepsister's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment, the blood in my veins grew cold. I hadn't heard from her in years. Not since that day she had asked for a job. What could she possibly want? Now my heart raced with a mixture of curiosity and dread, but I answered the call anyway. "Hello," I said, my voice steady, though my pulse was erratic. "It's me," she said. Her voice strained. I don't know if you remember, but we used to be close, and I need your help for a moment." I couldn't speak the nerve of her after all these years, after everything she had put me through. She was calling me for help. The girl who had called me nothing more than a servant. The girl who had dismissed me without a second thought, who was infuriating, but I kept my composure, my mind racing. "What kind of help?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion and frustration. "I've gotten myself into some trouble," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know what to do. I've been looking for a way out, and I thought maybe could help me. Please, I'm desperate." I could hear the crack in her voice, the vulnerability that was so foreign to me. It was hard to reconcile this version of my stepsister with the confident, smug girl I had once known. I felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for her, but at the same time, a part of me reveled in her desperation. She was the one now begging for something. She had once denied me so easily. "What exactly do you need from me?" I asked, my voice cold now. Each word measured. "I need a job," she said, her voice cracking. "I can't get back on my feet without one. And I've tried everything. I know I don't deserve it, but if you could just give me a chance." A part of me wanted to say no, to tell her that she had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. But then another part of me, the part that had suffered for so long, wanted to do what I had always dreamed of. To be the one who decided her fate. "Okay," I said, surprising myself with the calmness in my voice. "I'll give you a chance, but you need to prove yourself. You need to show me that you're serious about turning things around." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and then she exhaled a shaky breath. "Thank you, don't know how much this means to me." I hung up the phone and sat back in my chair, reflecting on the choice I had just made. I had granted her a chance, but I knew deep down that this wasn't about mercy. This was about control. I was the one in charge now. And I was going to make sure she understood that. But as I thought about the years I had spent fighting to get here, I realized that this wasn't just about her. It was about me, about taking charge of my life and my future and proving to myself that I had finally become the person I had always wanted to be. The call from my stepsister had shaken me more than I cared to admit. As soon as I hung up, I sat at my desk for a long while, just staring at the wall. A strange emptiness washed over me, but it wasn't the emptiness of regret or doubt. It was something deeper, more primal, a realization that I had just given her, the one thing I had spent years fighting for a chance. But it wasn't just about her anymore. This moment wasn't about retribution or forgiveness. It was a testament to how far I had come from that girl who had once been dismissed as nothing more than a servant. The irony wasn't lost on me, how a single decision, a single opportunity could turn the tables so dramatically. I was no longer that girl, and my stepsister would soon learn that nothing was ever going to be the same between us again. The next few days passed as I threw myself back into work. The routine I had carved out for myself had become second nature. Wake up early, check emails, attend meetings, manage projects. Everything had a purpose now. Every step. A small victory in a much larger journey. I was no longer defined by what I had been, but by what I had made myself still. Despite the steady progress of my career, I found myself wondering whether the job offer I had made to my stepsister was the right move I hadn't expected to feel. This conflicted. I had been ready for so long to cut ties with the past, to sever any connection to the life I had once led, but now, with her back in my life, the situation felt different. The power I held, the ability to shape her future left me unsettled. But I couldn't afford to be weak. I had built my life from nothing, and I would not let the past dictate my future. So I resolved to continue down the path I had set for myself, unwavering and resolute. Yet there was a part of me that wondered, was I truly in control? Or was I simply reliving the same cycles of humiliation? Now, with the roles reversed, the following week, my stepsister arrived at my office for her first day of work. I watched her walk into the building with a look of nervous anticipation, a far cry from the confident young woman who had once treated me as inferior. She had changed in ways that weren't immediately visible, but I could sense the difference in her every move. There was no arrogance in her posture now, no smugness in her smile. She was lost, adrift, and for the first time I felt a strange pity for her. I quickly shut down the sentiment. Pity would not help me now. I had to stay focused. This wasn't about her, this was about me. As she entered my office, I could see the trepidation in her eyes. Her footsteps were tentative, as though she was walking on eggshells. She had the look of someone who had nothing left to lose, someone who was trying desperately to regain what she had lost. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of satisfaction. She had come to me for help, but in reality it was I who was in control now. Morning, she said, her voice shaky but polite. "I'm ready to get started." I nodded, not offering any words of encouragement. My role wasn't to nurture her. She had never nurtured me. My job was to assess her, to see if she was truly capable of change. "Let's start with the basics," I said, handing her a set of files. "These are some of the projects we're currently working on. I need you to familiarize yourself with them and let me know if you have any questions, but understand this. I expect results, not promises, not excuses. You either prove yourself or you're out." She nodded, swallowing hard. I could tell she was struggling to maintain composure, but there was a sense of humility in her that hadn't been there before. It was as though the walls she had once built around herself were slowly crumbling, leaving her vulnerable in a way I hadn't anticipated. The first few days passed uneventfully. She worked diligently, completing the tasks I assigned her with a level of competence that surprised me. but I was careful not to let my guard down. There was still something about her that felt off, something I couldn't quite place. Perhaps it was the way she held herself when she thought no one was watching, or the slight edge of impatience that still lingered in her words. I had learned the hard way that people didn't change overnight, and I wasn't about to let her slip past me with a few good days of work. She had to prove herself, and I was going to make sure she did one afternoon. I asked her to meet me in the conference room. We needed to discuss a particularly important project I had been overseeing, one that required a keen attention to detail. As I laid out the plans and outlined the deadlines, I noticed her shifting in her seat, her eyes darting around the room. It was subtle, but I could see it, a sense of unease, of fear creeping into her expression. The old arrogance was gone, replaced by something else, a self-doubt I hadn't expected when I finished outlining the project. I paused, watching her closely. "Do you think you're ready for this?" I asked, my voice calm, yet laced with a challenge. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, I'm ready. I'll give it my best shot." I studied her for a long moment in that silence. I could hear the weight of her words, the undertones of desperation. She wasn't just asking for a chance, she was pleading for validation. For the first time, I realized that her struggles were far deeper than I had anticipated. She wasn't just trying to rebuild her career, she was trying to rebuild herself, to reconcile with the person she had become. But even in the face of her vulnerability, I didn't flinch. She had to earn my respect, just as I had earned my own. She wasn't going to receive any handouts from me. I had worked too hard to get to this point, and I wasn't about to let her slip back into the same patterns that had once defined her. "Prove it," I said, my voice steady, "and I'll give you the opportunity you're asking for. But if you fail, don't expect another chance," she nodded. Her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and fear. And with that, she left the room, more unsure than ever of the future that lay ahead of her. As the days wore on, I could feel the tension between us growing. My stepsister was doing her best to prove herself, but there were moments when I could see her slipping back into old habits. The impatience would creep in when she was faced with a challenge, and I could almost see her fighting the urge to revert to the old arrogance that had defined her for so long. But I was resolute. I was watching her closely, waiting for her to falter. Every small misstep was a reminder that she hadn't fully learned the lessons she needed to, and I wasn't about to let her think she could walk away and scathe the power I realized was not in the opportunity one had given her. The power was in the control I still held, and with every passing day, I grew more certain that this wasn't just about her. Redemption, this was about my own, about proving to myself that I could not rise above the past, but rewrite it entirely. It had been weeks since I offered my stepsister the job, and as each day passed, I grew more certain that I had made the right decision. I watched her closely, evaluating every move, every word she spoke, despite the initial discomfort of having her back in my life. The control I felt as I observed her struggle with the responsibilities I had handed her was strangely satisfying. I was no longer the helpless girl who had once been humiliated and dismissed. Now I was the one in charge, and yet as much as I relished in the power of that control, a small part of me felt a lingering unease, a whisper at the back of my mind that warned me things might not be as simple as they seemed. And then on a Tuesday afternoon, the phone rang. The name on the screen was one I had come to dread, my stepsister. I hesitated before answering, my finger hovering over the screen. What could she possibly want now? The way she had approached me before, begging for help, seemed like a thing of the past. She had been working diligently, showing up on time, following through on tasks. There had been no signs of rebellion or arrogance since that first day. So why was she calling? I picked up the phone, my heart beating faster than usual. "Hello," I said, my voice betraying nothing. "Hi," she said, her voice shaky. A stark contrast to the confident tone she had once carried. I need to talk to you. It's important. Can we meet?" I frowned, sensing the weight in her words. There was something urgent in her tone, a desperation that sent a shiver down my spine. My stepsister, once so sure of herself, was now calling me for help again. I had given her a chance, and now she was asking for more. I wasn't sure what she expected from me, but I couldn't afford to let her manipulate the situation. "All right," I said, keeping my voice even. "We can meet, but I'm busy." "Make it quick," she agreed. And within an hour she arrived at my office, looking disheveled and on edge. Her clothes, once pristine and carefully chosen, now seemed hastily thrown together. Her hair was a bit messy, and her eyes, usually bright with ambition, were dim, shadowed by what I could only guess was a mixture of exhaustion and anxiety. There was no mistaking it. She was no longer the same confident girl who had laughed at my struggles. Something had changed, something I had not anticipated. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to gauge the situation, but before she could answer, her lips trembled and she took a deep breath as though summoning the courage to speak. "I don't know what to do," she began, her voice cracking. "I thought I had everything under control. But it's slipping away. The job isn't enough. I need more. Please, I'm at my breaking point." I stared at her, shocked. This wasn't the story I had expected to hear. The girl who had once had everything handed to her was now standing before me, pleading for help. It was almost too much to comprehend. I had offered her a job, and she had been doing well, meeting deadlines and showing up as expected. But now she was admitting that it wasn't enough. She was admitting that she had failed in some deeper, more personal way, and I could see it in her eyes. The desperation to find a way out to fix whatever she had broken. "What do you mean it's slipping away?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've been doing fine here. You've been keeping up with your work." She wiped away a tear that had started to fall, and I could see the weight of something larger pressing down on her. "It's not the job," she admitted. "It's everything else. My life is falling apart. I've lost control of everything. I'm in debt. I'm barely keeping it together. I don't know how to fix this." The words hit me harder than I expected. Debt. Her life falling apart. The same girl who had once sneered at the idea of ever needing help was now admitting she had no idea how to climb out of the hole she had dug herself into. I could feel a strange mix of emotions swelling inside me, bigger satisfaction, pity. But most of all, I felt something. I hadn't expected sympathy. She had built her life on the belief that she was superior, that she could take whatever she wanted without consequence. But now, as she sat before me, it was clear that the weight of her own decisions had finally caught up with her. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance, she was a victim of her own hubris. But the question remained, did I have the power to let go of the past and help her, or would I let her drown in the mess she had created? "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered, breaking the silence. "I need help. I need a way out. I don't want to lose everything, but I don't know what to do anymore." I could see the vulnerability in her face. Now the cracks in the armor that she had spent so many years building. The same armor that had shielded her from the truth of her own flaws. But now there was nothing left to hide behind. I was the one who had the power to either push her further into her downward spiral or offer her a lifeline. And in that moment, I realized something crucial. I wasn't just the person who could offer help. I was also the one who could demand repayment for the years of cruelty, for the years of her treating me as less than human. She had come to me, and now she would learn that every action had a consequence. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes never leaving hers. "You've put yourself in this position," I said coldly, though my heart was heavy with the weight of the decision I was about to make. "You've made choices, and now you have to live with them, but I'm not going to let you drag me into your mess." She flinched, the words stinging more than I intended, but it was the truth. She had made her own bed, and it was time for her to lie in it. I wasn't going to play the role of the benevolent savior, rescuing her from her own mistakes, but even as I spoke those words, I could see the hurt in her eyes. I could see the desperate, broken person who was finally facing the consequences of her actions. But I continued, my voice softening just slightly. "I'll give you one more chance, but you need to prove that you're willing to change. I'm not going to help you unless I see real effort. This job isn't just a lifeline. It's a chance to rebuild, but if you waste it, you won't get another." She nodded, a silent tear falling down her cheek as she absorbed my words. And though I knew she didn't fully understand the weight of the ultimatum I had just given her, I also knew that this was the point of no return. She had crossed a line, and now the stakes were higher than ever. The game was no longer just about her redemption. It was about how far she was willing to go to prove she deserved to stand beside me as she left the office. I sat there, the room still heavy with the tension of our conversation. I had given her a chance, but I knew that the real test was just beginning. Would she rise to the occasion? Or would she collapse under the weight of her own failures? Either way, I was no longer the girl who had once been invisible. I was the one who held the power, and I was going to make sure she knew it. The day following my stepsister's admission of desperation felt like a test of sorts. There was an underlying tension in the air every time we passed each other in the office. It was as though we were both walking a tightrope, she trying to prove she was worth the second chance, and I holding the balance of power, uncertain whether to extend my trust or withhold it completely. Knew that I couldn't afford to let emotions cloud my judgment, but as time passed, I found myself wondering how far I could push her before she broke. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It was about proving that I wasn't the same person I had been, and she wasn't the same person she used to be. Either one morning, as I sat behind my desk reviewing some reports, I heard the soft knock on my office door. Without looking up, I gestured for her to come in. She hesitated for just a moment, then stepped in, her posture stiff but determined. She had been doing well the past few days, completing tasks without complaint, asking the right questions, and generally keeping her head down. But there was something different about her this time. Something that made my heart skip a beat. It wasn't just her usual nervous energy. It was a look in her eyes, one I hadn't seen before. A flicker of fear, perhaps. But also something deeper. Something that resembled resolve. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "It's important." I set the report aside, leaning back in my chair, my fingers steepling in front of me. "Go ahead, I'm listening." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I'm not sure how to say this, but I'm afraid that I'm not the right fit for this job. I've tried, I really have, but I feel like I'm failing. I know I haven't been perfect, and I just can't help but feel like I'm holding you back." The words hung in the air between us like a thick fog. I could see the vulnerability in her face, the admission of weakness. This was not the same confident stepsister I had once known, the girl who had sneered at my efforts, who had dismissed my every attempt to prove myself. This was a different person altogether, one who was not only admitting her own shortcomings, but also asking for help in a way that seemed almost alien to me. It took everything in me not to let the smallest hint of satisfaction show on my face. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when I could finally take control of the situation completely. I stood up from my desk and walked toward the window, looking out at the city below. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the skyline. The world outside seemed so peaceful, so calm, but inside the office things were anything but. I turned to face her, my eyes narrowing as I considered her words. "I've given you a chance, haven't I?" I said slowly, my voice steady, but cold. "You've had weeks to prove yourself. You've been doing your job. But you still don't seem to understand the gravity of the situation. You don't seem to get that. I'm not just giving you a second chance out of the goodness of my heart. I'm not a charity, and neither are you." Her face flushed with embarrassment, and I could see the regret in her eyes. "I know," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But it's not just about the job. I've been trying to keep my life together, and I've been failing." I studied her for a moment longer, my thoughts swirling. This was a pivotal moment for both of us. If I gave in to the part of me that wanted to show her mercy, I could risk losing the power I had worked so hard to gain. I couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not when I had finally risen to a place where I was in control, where I didn't have to answer to anyone but myself. I could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on me. But I knew what had to be done. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. "I understand that you're struggling," I said, my voice low and measured. "But you need to understand something important. This job, this life that you're trying to build, none of it will matter unless you can prove that you have the strength to push through when things get hard. And right now, it doesn't seem like you have that strength." Her eyes flickered with a mix of frustration and desperation. "I do have strength," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. I just need more time. Please just give me more time. But I shook my head, cutting her off. Time is something I don't have. Something. To give time doesn't give anyone second chances. It's what you do with the time you have that matters, and right now you're wasting it. I could see the realization dawn on her. She was beginning to understand the true nature of the position I had put her in. She wasn't just being tested for her job performance anymore. She was being tested for her character, for her resilience. It was up to her to decide whether she would rise to the challenge or sink back into the same patterns of self-doubt and fear that had plagued her before. "Do you understand?" asked my voice hard. She nodded slowly, but there was something in her eyes now. Something that told me she wasn't just accepting my words. She was processing them, internalizing them. I could see it in the way her posture shifted, the way her gaze hardened just a little. It was the beginning of something important. Something I hadn't expected to see. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice steadying. I nodded in response. "Good, now show me, prove it for them." Rest of the day, the atmosphere between us was different. There was an unspoken understanding, a tension that hung in the air. As I watched her work with newfound determination, it was as if she had flipped a switch, suddenly more focused, more serious about her responsibilities. She no longer looked lost or unsure. She looked like someone who had finally recognized the stakes, someone who understood that the only way to survive was to prove her worth by the end of the day. I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction, not because I had broken her down, but because I had seen her rise from the ashes of her own failures. She had taken the challenge, and now it was up to her to continue proving herself. But what struck me the most was that she wasn't just proving herself to me. She was proving herself to herself. As I sat back in my chair that evening, reviewing the work she had completed, I realized that the power I held over her wasn't just about control. It was about transformation. I had forced her to confront the reality of her situation, and in doing so, I had given her the chance to rebuild her life. It was up to her now to take that chance and make something of it. But no matter what happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't the same person I had been before. I wasn't the girl who had been discarded and forgotten. I was someone new, stronger, wiser, and fully in control of my own destiny. And as long as I held that power, I would never allow anyone to take it from me again. The days after I had made her confront the reality of her situation were filled with a peculiar tension. It was as though the roles had shifted. Beyond just our professional duties, there was an undercurrent of something deeper now, something I hadn't anticipated. She had risen to the challenge, I could see that much. Her work ethic had transformed her. Demeanor had softened Ed. But that spark of vulnerability, the fear that she might fail, still lingered in her eyes. She no longer had the arrogance that once defined her, but now as she strove for redemption. I realized that I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted out of this process. I sat at my desk reviewing her progress on a new project she had taken it on, with a fierce dedication I hadn't expected. It was as if the weight of the task was something she had to prove to herself, not to me. I admired the way she worked, the way she focused on every detail. But that same sense of satisfaction I'd felt when I had first extended the opportunity to her, when I had handed her the lifeline, was now clouded with something I couldn't quite place. What if she was too broken to ever truly rise? What if, despite all the effort she was putting into proving herself, she was only doing it because she felt she had no other choice? I couldn't stop myself from thinking about it. Was this really a redemption arc for her? Or was it a cruel game I was playing? I had watched her for weeks, seeing the way she had tried to regain control, but part of me wondered if I was simply giving her false hope. I had made her beg for help. I had forced her to face her worst fears, and now, despite her progress, I still wasn't sure if I could trust her fully. Was I being too harsh, or was I doing what was necessary for her growth? The door opened with a soft click, pulling me from my thoughts. She stood there, standing just outside my office, her hands slightly trembling as she nervously fidgeted with the edge of her blouse. Her face was a mixture of resolve and hesitation. She looked like a different person, a far cry from the girl who once mocked me with every passing glance, but I could still sense the vulnerability in her presence. She wasn't ready to fully accept that she had changed. She still believed that she had to prove herself in ways that went beyond what was necessary. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice unsteady but polite. I nodded, motioning for her to enter. She walked into the room, closing the door behind her softly. I gestured for her to sit, not saying a word, as she lowered herself into the chair across from me for a moment. The silence between us felt charged, and I couldn't help but feel as though something important was about to unfold. He had come to me with a request. But this time it was different. This wasn't about the work she had done, or about making up for past mistakes. This time it was about something deeper, something personal. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," she began, her voice hesitant about needing to prove myself. "I've been working so hard to show you that I can change, but I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can ever undo what I did before. The things I said, how I treated you, how I treated everyone." She paused, looking down at her hands in her lap. Can you ever forgive me for that? Can you ever see me as someone who's worthy of your trust?" The question hung in the air, and I felt my heart tighten for all her bravado, for all her earlier agog. Here she was vulnerable and unsure, asking for forgiveness in a way that completely shifted the dynamic between us. The girl who had once stood over me looking down with disdain was now asking me for something I hadn't expected. Redemption. I took a slow breath, considering my response carefully. Was I supposed to give her what she wanted? Was I supposed to say that I forgave her, that it was all behind us? I had spent so much time building my own strength, so much time getting to a place where I could control my own destiny. Was I ready to relinquish that control and offer her the grace she was asking for? Could I truly forgive her, knowing how much her past actions had shaped who I had become? "You've worked hard," I said slowly, my voice steady, "and I've seen the effort you've put into proving yourself. But forgiveness isn't just something you get automatically, just because you ask for it. Something that takes time. It's something that has to be earned. And right now you're still in the process of earning it." Her shoulders slumped slightly, but she nodded, acknowledging the truth in my words. "I understand," she said softly. "I just wanted to know if there's a chance, if there's any way for us to move forward." The weight of her question settled heavily on me. I had been giving her the space to prove herself, but I had never fully confronted what I was really asking of her. Was I willing to trust her again, or had the damage been done permanently, altering the way I saw her? She had come to me seeking absolution. But was I ready to offer it, knowing the complexities of our past? I realized in that moment that the choice I made now would shape everything if I chose to forgive her, to move forward with her as a trusted colleague. I would be letting go of the bitterness that had defined our relationship for so long, but if I didn't, I would be holding on to the past, keeping her at arm's length, never allowing either of us to fully heal. I took a deep breath, looking at her with a mixture of empathy and resolve. The truth is, I can't just forget everything that's happened, but I can try to move forward, Ward. If you show me that you're not the same person you were, if you keep proving to me that you can be trusted, then I'm willing to start over, but don't mistake that for forgiveness. It's a second chance, nothing more. She looked at me, her eyes glistening with what I could only assume was relief and uncertainty. I could see the conflict in her. She wasn't sure whether she was relieved or afraid, that the opportunity one was offering was fragile, but I knew that this was the right thing. It was not about offering complete forgiveness, but about allowing the possibility of healing. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice firm. "I'll prove that I can be someone you can trust." I nodded, but a part of me wondered if she truly understood what it meant to earn trust. The road ahead would be difficult, but at least now we both knew where we stood. This wasn't about erasing the past, it was about learning from it, building something new from the ruins I had given her a chance, but it was up to her to make it count. As she left my office that day, I sat there reflecting on the decision I had just made. There was still so much uncertainty in the air, so much left unresolved, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. The power had shifted, not just in my office, but in my heart. I wasn't the same person I had been before, bitter, resentful, holding on to the past. I was learning to move forward, to open the door to possibilities I hadn't considered before. But as I sat there, I knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning. As the days passed after my conveyor's action with my stepsister, I couldn't shake the weight of the decision I had made. Offering her a chance to prove herself wasn't an easy choice, nor was it one I made lightly. It was a gamble. Would she truly change, or was this just another attempt to manipulate the situation to regain the upper hand? I had no way of knowing. What I did know was that the past, however painful, couldn't be erased, and as much as I wanted to move on from it, seemed to have a way of creeping back into every decision I made. I spent my nights tossing and turning, wrestling with my thoughts. A part of me wanted to be kind, to forgive her and let her start fresh. After all, she was family. My stepfamily, yes, but family nonetheless. I had been in her shoes, once lost and looking for redemption. And the idea of holding a grudge forever seemed as exhausting as it was pointless. Yet another part of me was reluctant to let go of the power I had gained, the sense of control that had come with putting her in her place. If I let her back in, if I showed too much compassion, would I be losing everything I had worked for? Could I really afford to offer her redemption when she had been so cruel to me for so long? The internal battle continued. But as time went on, the tension between us grew. She worked harder, showed up earlier, and stayed later, making an effort that was undeniable. But there were still moments, fleeting seconds, when her old self resurfaced, when the arrogance flickered in her eyes, when she grew impatient with a colleague or dismissed an idea with the same careless disregard she had once shown me. Those moments unsettled me. Were they a sign that she hadn't really changed, or were they simply echoes of a past she was struggling to escape? I tried to keep my distance, to remain the professional observer I needed to be, but something about watching her struggle, something about seeing her wrestle with her own demons, made me wonder. Was it fair for me to hold on to the past so tightly when she was clearly trying to break free from it? Wasn't I, in a way, doing the same thing by holding her to standards that didn't allow for growth? Could I be so blinded by my need for justice that I was missing the possibility of her redemption? The weight of these questions hung over me like a storm cloud. Every day, I watched her with a critical eye, measuring her every move, and yet I couldn't ignore the small victories she was achieving. Had earned the respect of the team, and slowly her confidence seemed to return. Though it was tempered by humility, she was no longer the brash, entitled girl who had once mocked me. She was someone who had learned to navigate the world with grace, someone who understood the value of hard work and humility. One morning, as I sat at my desk reviewing emails and preparing for a meeting, my stepsister entered the office holding a file in her hands. Her face was serious, her eyes a little too focused, as though there was something she needed to say but hadn't yet found the right words. "I need to talk to you," she said. Her voice steady, but carrying an underlying tension. She placed the file down on my desk and sat across from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I looked at her, trying to read her expression. "What's going on?" "I've been thinking about our conversation," she began, and I could sense the hesitation in her voice, "about the second chance you gave me, and I've been working hard, trying to prove to you that I'm not the same person I was, but I'm not sure it's enough. I feel like I need to make things right between us, not just professionally, but personally." I blinked, unsure of what she was getting at. "What do you mean by make things right?" I asked, my tone guarded. She hesitated again, her gaze dropping to her hands before meeting my eyes once more. "I want to apologize," she said, her voice softer now. "For everything, for the way I treated you, for everything I said. I was cruel, and I'm sorry. I've realized that what I did wasn't just hurtful. It was wrong, and I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry, and that I'm trying to do better." The sincerity in her voice took me by surprise. I had heard apologies from her before, but they had always felt empty, like words meant to plate, not truly change. But this was different. She wasn't just apologizing for the sake of doing so. She was acknowledging the depth of the harm she had caused, and that in itself was a significant step. I leaned back in my chair, taking a moment to absorb what she had said. The old part of me, the part that had been wronged for so long, wanted to reject her apology outright, to remind her of all the pain she had caused. But the other part of me, the part that had fought so hard to get here, to become someone who could look at her with clarity, instead of resentment, saw something different in her now. I saw a person who had grown, who was facing her own demons and doing the hard work of change. I saw a person who for the first time was trying to make amends. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said slowly, my voice softer than I intended. But I appreciate that you're taking responsibility for your actions. That means more than you might think. She nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. I understand. I don't expect anything from you. I just needed you to know that I'm not the same person anymore. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I'm asking for a chance to prove that I'm worthy of it, worthy of your trust. I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her not as the stepsister who had once treated me like dirt, but as someone who had fought to rise above her past. The question that had lingered in my mind for so long, whether to offer her redemption or continue holding on to the power I had gained, felt less pressing now. In that moment, I realized that redemption wasn't something I could give her. It was something she had to earn, and she was already on the path to earning it one step at a time. I can't promise you that everything will be easy, I said, my voice steady but firm. But I can promise that if you keep showing me that you're committed to changing, then I'll keep giving you the chance to prove it. She smiled, then a genuine smile that reached her eyes. It was a small victory for both of us, a sign that the wall between us were slowly starting to crumble as she left my office. I sat there for a long time, reflecting on everything that had led to this moment. The choice to forgive, the choice to trust, those were not easy decisions. But in that moment, I realized that the true power didn't lie in holding on to past wrongs. The true power was in moving forward together and allowing ourselves to heal. And as much as I had once yearned for revenge, I now saw that redemption for both of us was the real victory. The following weeks unfolded with an unexpected ease, and though I had told myself I would remain cautious, I couldn't ignore the subtle changes I saw in her. My stepsister, the girl who had once been a figure of arrogance and disdain, was transforming before my eyes. It wasn't just the work she was doing, though she had exceeded all expectations. It wasn't just the fact that she was doing it all with a sincerity I hadn't known she possessed. It was something deeper, something I couldn't put my finger on. Every time she came into my office, she seemed a little more comfortable in her own skin. Her posture was less stiff, her voice more confident, though still tempered with a quiet humility. And as she made small efforts to connect with the team, to build relationships that weren't just based on the work she was assigned, I saw something that I hadn't seen before. Vulnerability, genuine, honest vulnerability. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult meeting, she walked into my office with an air of determination I hadn't seen in her before. For she had a file in her hands, and I could tell by the way her jaw was set that this wasn't just another day at the office. I think I need to tell you something, she said, her voice steady but laced with apprehension. I gestured for her to sit. My curiosity piqued. Go ahead, I said, leaning forward slightly, my eyes narrowing with interest. She sat down across from me, placing the file on the desk. I've been thinking a lot lately. She began, her voice softening as she spoke about everything, about how I've been acting and why I've been so defensive and why I've treated people the way I did. I think I've always believed that if I pushed everyone away, if I made them see me as something above them, I wouldn't have to deal with the fear of being vulnerable, the fear of not being good enough. I remained silent, allowing her the space to continue. I had always known that she had built walls around herself, but hearing her articulate it, hearing her acknowledge her own fears, was something I hadn't expected. I've always been afraid, she continued, her eyes locking with mine. Afraid of failing, afraid of not living up to expectations, especially my own. But lately, I've been realizing that the only way to succeed isn't to protect myself from everything. It's to face my mistakes, to deal with the fear and let go of this idea that I have to be perfect. I felt a lump form in my throat as I listened to her words. There was something so raw in her confession, so painfully honest, that it took me by surprise. For the first time, I could see the depth of her struggle. This wasn't just about her past actions. This was about a girl who had been broken by her own insecurities, someone who had created a world around herself to shield herself from the very things that had held her back. For a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. I had spent so many years holding on to the bitterness of our past, unable to let go of the things she had done to me. But now, as I sat in front of her, I realized something important. She wasn't the only one who needed to let go. I had been holding on to the past for far too long, letting it shape my every decision. I had been holding on to my need for justice, for revenge. But in doing so, I had forgotten what it meant to forgive, to move on. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, her voice trembling. "I know I can't change what I did, but I want you to know that I regret it. I regret the way I treated you, the way I treated everyone. I wasn't trying to hurt you, but I know I did." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had spent so many years holding on to the hurt she caused, convinced that I needed to make her understand the depth of my pain before I could move on. But now, as I watched her, I realized that the power of healing wasn't in making her pay for her past actions. It was in forgiving her, not for her, but for myself. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. "But you don't need to apologize to me anymore. You've already shown me that you're willing to change, and I think that's enough." Her eyes widened, and she looked at me as though she had never heard anything so profound, really. She asked, her voice filled with disbelief. I nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of my lips. "Yes, I can see that you're trying, and that's all anyone can do, trying to do better. Trying to be better." The room was silent for a moment as we both processed the weight of what had just been said. I felt a sense of peace wash over me, a quiet clarity that had eluded me for so long. The anger, the resentment, it was all gone in its place. With something I hadn't expected, empathy. I had finally understood that my stepsister's transformation wasn't just about her, it was about me too. I had been holding on to my own fears and insecurities, afraid to let go of the past, afraid to move on. But now I could see that the only way forward was to embrace the changes that had happened between us, to let go of the past and make space for the future. She smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. "I don't know what to say," she said, softly. "You don't have to say anything," I replied. My voice steady, "Just keep proving that you're capable of change. That's all I need from you." Her smile deepened, and for the first time I saw the girl I had always hoped she could be. The walls she had built around herself were crumbling, and in their place, I saw someone who was learning to trust, learning to be vulnerable, and most importantly, learning to forgive herself. As she left my office that day, I sat back in my chair reflecting on everything that had led me to this moment. I had spent so much of my life consumed by resentment, determined to make her understand the pain she had caused me. But now I saw things differently. It wasn't about her understanding my pain. It was about me choosing to let it go. It was about me choosing to heal. Not just for her, but for myself in that moment. I realized that closure wasn't something I could wait for someone else to give me. It was something I had to give myself. And as I watched my stepsister walk out of my office with a new sense of purpose in her step, I knew that we were both on the path to something better. The past no longer held power over us. The future was ours to shape. And that in itself was the most powerful kind of closure. The days following my conversation with my stepsister unfolded in a way that I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't that the dynamic between us had dramatically shifted overnight. It was more that the pieces we had both been working so hard to place began to align in a way that felt organic, almost inevitable. There was a sense of calm that had settled into the office. Gone was the tension that had hung in the air, replaced by a quiet understanding that neither of us had fully expected. I found myself reflecting on everything that had led me to this point, how my life had been shaped by my stepfamily's cruelty, how I had fought tooth and nail to rise above the role they had cast me. In the years of resentment, of building walls around my heart, had always been my way of protecting myself. But as I looked at the person my stepsister was becoming, as I saw the genuine effort she was putting into changing, I realized something profound. The walls I had built weren't just separating me from her. They were keeping me trapped in the past. Every time I walked through the office, now I saw something different in her. It was subtle, but it was there. Her interactions with the team were becoming less guarded, more open. She no longer held herself with the same defensive posture, as though expecting to be attacked at every turn. There was a softness to her now, a humility that had replaced the arrogance that had once defended her. She had become a person who was no longer afraid to show vulnerability, to admit that she didn't have all the answers, to ask for help when she needed it. And in that, I saw myself a person who had spent so much of her life afraid to show weakness, afraid to be anything less than perfect one afternoon. As I was preparing for a meeting, she knocked softly on my door. Her face was more serious than usual, but there was something in her eyes that caught my attention. A mixture of resolve and quiet hope. "Can we talk?" she asked, stepping into the room before I had a chance to respond. I motioned to the chair across from me. "Of course, what's on your mind?" She sat down, her hands clasped together nervously in her lap. There was a silence between us, one that seemed to stretch longer than either of us expected. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw her hesitate, unsure of how to proceed. "I've been thinking about what you said to me," she began, her voice a little shaky but firm, nonetheless about proving myself, about moving forward, and I've realized something. He paused, taking a deep breath. "I've spent my whole life trying to be perfect, trying to be someone I'm not, and I think that's what's been holding me back. I've been so focused on trying to earn your forgiveness, your approval, that I've lost sight of what really matters." I didn't interrupt her. Instead, I simply waited for her to continue, the weight of her words settling over me. "I've been running from the past for so long," she said softly, "but I can't keep running anymore. I can't keep pretending that I'm the person I was. I've people, including you, and I need to face that. I need to own it, and I want to prove to you, not just through my actions, but by showing you who I really am, that I can be someone worthy of your trust." I could hear the sincerity in her voice, and it took me by surprise. For so long, I had held on to the idea of revenge, of making her feel the weight of her actions. But as I looked at her, I realized that the revenge I had longed for wasn't going to heal me. It wasn't going to bring me peace. What I needed was closure, and that closure wasn't going to come from holding her accountable for every mistake she had made. It was going to come from letting go. "Thank you for saying that," I said quietly. "For the first time, I can see that you're not just trying to make up for the past. You're trying to be someone different, and that's all I can ask for." Her eyes softened, and I saw the relief in her expression. It was as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders, one she hadn't realized she was carrying until now. "I don't expect everything to be fixed overnight," she said, "but I hope one day you'll be able to look at me and see someone who's trying, someone who's not the same person who hurt you." Before I nodded, understanding the depth of what she was asking. I had spent so much time holding on to the past, holding on to my anger and resentment, that I hadn't realized how much it had been holding me back. It wasn't just about forgiving her, it was about forgiving myself. I had been so focused on the idea of making her pay for what she had done that I hadn't given myself the freedom to move forward. "I'm not saying that everything's forgotten," I replied, my voice steady, "but I'm willing to move forward. I'm willing to let go of the past, and I think that's enough." A sense of quiet understanding passed between us, and in that moment I realized something truly profound. Forgiveness wasn't just about offering absolution to someone else. It was about freeing yourself from the grip of bitterness and regret. It wasn't about erasing the pain of the past. It was about choosing to live without it. She smiled, and for the first time in a long while, it was a smile that felt genuine. It wasn't the smile of someone trying to manipulate or prove themselves. It was the smile of someone who had accepted their flaws, their mistakes, and who was ready to move forward with a clear heart. "I won't let you down," she said softly, her voice filled with a new sense of determination. "I know you won't," I replied, warmth spreading through me as she left my office. I sat back in my chair, reflecting on the journey we had both taken to get to this point for so long. I had clung to the idea of revenge, convinced that it was the only way to make her understand the pain she had caused. But now I saw that the only way forward was through healing, through letting go of the past. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't just forgiving her. I was setting myself free. The future no longer seemed so uncertain. The power that had once felt so fragile, so tenuous, was now mine to shape, not through anger or resentment, but through growth and understanding. And in that I found peace, not just for her, but for myself.